Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm broadcaster and raconteur Al Spry. It's great to be here with you where we're making some radio magic, Reagan, with one of our friends, Alan Grayson, Representative Alan Grayson.
Yeah, I'm Democratic Congressman from the Central Florida area, South Orange and Osceola counties. Love him or hate him, there is very little doubt about where he stands on the issue. He puts it out there for you, and in the moments ahead, that's exactly what he's going to do. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
I'm political analyst Al Spry, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about today, Reagan.
Hey, we do, and before we get to it, you know what I just did, Al? I forgot to say we're also on Tough TV 38.
Well, how dare you, Reagan?
Yeah, I just said it.
I'm going to have to turn your camera off. Of course we're on Tough TV 38, and we're on 3 times a week, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 9 for your hour of Florida Roundtable. Right here.
There you go.
And so I want to start with Governor Scott. His negative job approval persists in a new statewide poll. Voters in Florida give Rick Scott a negative job approval rating, but they've already just voted for him. He's already gone
happen?
negative. He's only been back in for 3 months, but 2 months.
Yeah.
New statewide poll by Quinnipiac University, 936 voters who were obviously cranky and didn't get enough coffee that morning.
Apparently.
Shows 42% approve of Scott's performance and 47% disapprove. So he's back underwater with voters. I don't know. Maybe it's because of the FDLE scandal that's brewing through the ouster of the former commissioner, Gerald Bailey. Scott's never been popular much with Floridians, but I beg to differ with that because they wouldn't have elected him twice.
He got elected twice.
His job approval's been negative. Maybe he's the man you love to hate, so I don't know. But that's that. So we have that. And then we also have, if you want to get into the medical pot business, $60,000 will get you at least a start. For a handful of eligible nurseries, the chance to grow the first legal marijuana in the state could be around the corner, but the opportunity will come at a price. The rule for growing Charlotte's Web, which is a strain of cannabis low in the high-inducing THC, but helpful for patients with cancer and children with severe epilepsy, was approved by a rulemaking panel last week. It's now available online for public comment. If not challenged in the next 21 days, it could go into effect by the end of April, at which point nurseries with more than 400,000 plants and 30 years of experience in Florida could apply for just one of 5 licenses to grow Charlotte's Web.
And you know what I find interesting in that? Now, my figures may not be up to date, but the last I knew officially, the price tag that you're putting on that is higher than the cost of an A license to own a bar and have a full liquor license service.
It probably is comparable. It's probably comparable.
Last I knew, it was $50,000 for the liquor license, and they want $60,000 for the pot license.
They do. So. They do. And this is of course, the number drummed up based on the estimated cost of kickstarting the state's cannabis program in the Department of Health's newly formed Office of Compassionate Use.
You know, not to throw you off track here, but given those figures, I just happened to realize that I might disremember.
Are you turning into Brian Williams on me, Reagan?
Oh my goodness! I had, and you know, I just real quickly here, interesting side thought on. He's not. You know, I saw Arturo Sandoval in concert the other night, and even he was jumping on Brian Williams.
Arturo Sandoval, he's still around.
Oh, yes. He was with the Orlando Philharmonic the other night. But
what did he say?
Well, he said, this is after Brian Williams announced he was taking a few days off. And Arturo Sandoval said, I think he's taking a few months off, maybe more. But called into question now from 10 years ago, the Hurricane Katrina reports, Brian Williams, his whole time reporting from New Orleans for Tom Brokaw, was in the French Quarter. The French Quarter didn't flood.
No. What, they have a couple of 4 inches maybe?
Brian Williams said he saw bodies floating in the water. Well, guess what? He didn't see it in the French Quarter.
He might have been doing some really strong non-Charlotte's Web THC-laced cannabis,
no,
perhaps.
He might have been reporting the way that the Pulitzer and Hearst reporters used to do during the Spanish-American War.
It's called
happy hour. You go down to the bar in the hotel and you write your story, and then you file it with New York.
Maybe he was floating around because he couldn't walk anymore. I don't know.
Put me down as neutral, but boy, I'll tell you what, I have over 40 years in the news business, and yeah, put me down as neutral.
All right, I'll put you down as neutral.
Really irritated with that one.
I could tell.
But
I could tell you want to kick his butt.
I don't think the NBC station is going to show up in my house for a long, long time. Not their news, anyways. Well, this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And momentarily, we're going to be joined for the first time in a while, and we're delighted to have him here, Democratic Orlando area Congressman Alan Grayson, our special guest in studio this day. The Florida Roundtable continues following these messages. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised, we are joined in studio this day by Orlando area Democratic Congressman Alan Grayson. And Alan, it's been a while. Good to see you again, sir.
It's been too long. I love your show. I'm glad to be back.
Well, thank you so very much. Before we get started, for folks outside of Central Florida who may not be familiar with the district, why don't you go ahead and describe, physically the district, the part of the state you represent here?
South Orlando. I represent a good chunk of Orange County, which is the main county for the Orlando area, plus all of Osceola County, and at least for the next 2 years, part of Polk County. Thanks to the gerrymandering, the lines are changing. We'll lose Polk County, get more of Orange County in the next election.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to start things off. We haven't had you on in a while, and we're remiss in doing that because, we like to get various opinions on various topics. I want to come in. When I told some folks that I was going to be interviewing you, they're like, well, why would you interview him and blah, 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 and all this stuff, because you have detractors as well as fans. But
well, to hell with them. Let them burn.
Who the detractors or the fans?
No, the detractors. Oh God, I always get that mixed up. It's a confusing job. Sometimes I remember that I'm supposed to kiss the babies and shake the hands, and other times I get all mixed up and the other stuff.
Well, I wanted to clear the air about you, and because it's been a little bit. We don't hear as much about you this term as we've had in previous terms. So, what's the biggest misconception about Alan Grayson that you want to rectify? Because now you have the floor.
Well, all right. I don't know if you call it a misconception or not, but the fact is that we get stuff done, and that's a misconception about Washington in general. Just because most people in D.C. get nothing done doesn't mean that I get nothing done. In the last 2 years, the 113th Congress, I passed more amendments than any other member of Congress. 31 amendments on the floor of the House. And when there's a party line vote, since I'm a Democrat and the Republicans have the majority, I lose every time there's a party line vote. Nevertheless, passed 31 amendments that were good, solid amendments that made America a better place. In December alone, 15 of my bills became law. 15 of my bills were incorporated in 3 larger bills that passed the House, passed the Senate, and were signed into law by the president. So, a lot of this job, like, frankly, your job, is talking. But the fact remains that the core responsibility is legislating. And I think that when it comes to legislating, I am cooking with gas, as we used to say back in the Bronx.
Well, and that's the thing. People like to pigeonhole people. They like to either say you're either a liberal or conservative or whatever. But, you've taken some positions that are definitely out of the liberal mindset, I think. One is with the Fourth Amendment issues that you've championed about NSA and spying, which is something that you would think a conservative or a Republican would be championing. But we saw a lot of Republicans, including some of your local colleagues here. I won't get into names, but we saw them signing up to keep the NSA spying in place. And, of course, that to me and to Reagan is a denigration of the Fourth Amendment. And we pretty much might as well just throw it out of the Constitution if it's not going to mean anything. So I wanted to get your take on that and what you're doing there, and also why it's dangerous to pigeonhole people.
Well, you were just mentioning that the superficial breakdown in Washington, D.C. is between Democrats and Republicans, but there's a deeper breakdown, and that breakdown comes out on these Fourth Amendment privacy issues. The breakdown is between principle and fear. every one of us took an oath to uphold the Constitution. The Constitution, among other things, says that we'll be free of unreasonable searches and seizures, and that in order to do an inspection of our papers and property, you need a warrant with particularity. Those are the terms that are used in the Constitution. What that means is that the government has no right to put its nose into my business unless it has some evidence that I've done something wrong, or I have evidence that somebody else has done something wrong. And that's a very basic fundamental principle, the fundamental principle of leave us alone. And it's embodied in our most fundamental document, the U.S. Constitution. What's happened is that some of us, like me, for instance, recognize that, understand that, want to protect our right to privacy. And others are afraid that something bad is going to happen somewhere in the world and they'll get blamed for it, and therefore it's somehow okay to institute a pervasive spying system that touches every part of our lives. Every part of our lives. I mean, it's been widely reported for the past 2 years that every time you make a phone call, the Department of Defense, specifically the NSA, gets a record of that call. Every single time you make a phone call, even when you're calling your mom, they get a record of who called whom and how long that call was. In addition to that, it's been widely reported that every piece of mail in this country gets photographed. Every single piece of mail gets photographed as it works its way through the Postal Service. Now, there's been speculation, which, of course, I can't comment on, that your credit card records also get obtained by the government. That your internet browsing records get obtained by the government, that the things that you order online get obtained through the government, that your texts get obtained by the government. I'm not going to say exactly how much of that is true and how much of that is false because, frankly, there's classified information involved. But you really wonder, what is the point of all this? A very detailed study was done by the White House a couple of years ago that showed that not one single terrorist attack had ever been foiled by this pervasive system of spying that we've been adopting in the United States since the Bush administration and continued and expanded under the Obama administration. What is the point of all this? We spend $70 billion a year, $70 billion a year, on the black part of the budget, the part of the budget that is classified, that I'm not allowed to discuss, which is almost entirely devoted to us spying on us. And for no good reason except that the busybodies can be happy. We've created a spying industrial complex that rivals the military industrial complex in expense and certainly exceeds it in the pervasiveness and interfering in our lives.
Well, let me ask you this. Why is it that the news media dropped this story so quickly? We had a big brouhaha about the NSA. Everybody was getting up in arms. 3 months later, you're hearing more about Beyonce and why she didn't win a Grammy or whatever. So what's going on there?
Well, I think what it comes down to is Beyonce is better looking than Edward Snowden.
I will give you that.
Yes, you just can't get around that fact, can you?
No, I can't.
But look, it's life in America is short attention span theater. It just flits from one subject to the next, just like we're about to do, I think.
Well, that's why we hire you guys as our representatives, right? We hire you guys as our representatives to be the watchdogs on this stuff because not everybody either wants to pay attention to it, it has the mental facility to pay attention to it, or
that's the problem. So many of us who we've hired to be representatives are sellouts to fear. They think that if there is a terrorist attack somewhere in the United States in the next 2 years, which is the term, it's as far as they look into the future, it's a 2-year election cycle, that they will be blamed for it if they ever voted against anything that the spying industrial complex wants.
Yeah, but are we going to
we literally give them a blank check.
Are we going to allow militants, terrorists, whatever you want to refer to them as, to run the U.S. government and decide what we use in the U.S. Constitution or not? It's absurd.
It's worse than that. If the pervasive spying that we now face in U.S. life had some actual value in deterring terrorists, then you could make that argument. But the fact is, it's not the terrorists who are dictating any of this upon us because this doesn't protect us from the terrorists. It does not make us any safer. No, it's simply selling our souls
So
to people who claim that they are protecting us.
So this makes for strange bedfellows, obviously. You're now, of course, allied with some of the most conservative Republicans on this issue, right? How does that work? I mean, are you guys crafting legislation together, and do you guys get along? I mean, how does it work when you're dealing with supposedly what they call the enemy, because it's the other party and stuff?
Well, it works much the way that you're describing. We do have allies on the other side of the aisle. They work their votes, we work our votes. And we try to come up with a majority, but the other side is extremely unscrupulous and utterly implacable. Section 215, a provision that is sometimes used as an excuse to authorize...
Yeah, the Patriot Act, right.
Yeah, Section 215 of the Patriot Act expires in the middle of this year. Mm-hmm. We'll see whether that leads to any sort of action or reaction. But what's happened already is that they took a bill that was a pretty decent bill. They waited until the last minute, the lame duck session last year, and then they amended it just as it was reaching the House floor to take out the good stuff and put in the bad stuff, and then had us vote on it without any warning. There's supposed to be a 72-hour rule, but it doesn't apply to amendments. 72 hours of notice doesn't apply to amendments. So Boehner and McCarthy and the other people who are in charge, who are all pro-spying, they stuck an amendment in at the last minute, and a lot of people didn't read the bill, didn't know they were. I voted against with the bill, but a lot of people didn't know, thought they were voting for the good stuff that had been in the bill and had been taken out. That's how unscrupulous these people are.
And I think one of the things that really what you're laying out here that I want to approach in a different way is that once these things are on the books and they get tied to a $70 billion price tag, once they're there, they're very difficult to get rid of.
Well, it's actually worse than that, because what they do is they take the law and they twist it beyond any sort of recognition. The existing law, the Patriot Act, says that they can do a search if it's relevant to an investigation. And they're claiming that every single phone call that anybody makes in the United States is somehow relevant to an investigation. So they take the words that actually have meaning, they have meaning, look up the meaning of the dictionary, and they make it into some sort of bizarre farce that has nothing to do with anything except for the fact that it rationalizes what they want to do, which is to be the ultimate busybodies.
Well, we opened Pandora's box after 9/11 with this Patriot Act, which I think is one of the most unpatriotic acts ever passed by any body of the United States. It's one of those serious misnomers. And so I wanted to, because I want to let people know there's a history here. The U.S. has never been allowed to spy on its own citizens. That was just something that was created in lieu of 9/11. So and I remember when it was passed, there were sunset provisions put into it by the Congress at the time, because they knew this wasn't really that great of an idea to do long term because of the usurpation of rights among Americans. So you mentioned that a few minutes ago, but what are the odds that we can actually turn this around and close this box, or is this box open for eternity now?
Well, I hope not, but in fact, the NSA has become legally a rogue operation. If you look at Section 215, it's not even arguable by any rational means that it justifies pervasive spying, but the courts refuse to do anything about it. The courts have been set up to rubber stamp, a special court has been set up to rubber stamp whatever it is that the spying industrial complex
FISA
wants to do. That's right.
Yeah, and these are so basically that takes away the checks and balances, Reagan.
That's right. And in addition to that, what they do is they try to search for anything that could possibly justify what they want to do. They search for Executive Order 12333, which, again, doesn't justify what they want, but they do it anyway.
All right. On that note, Congressman, we have to take a break here along our network line. Let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. Our very special guest this day is Orlando area Democratic Congressman Alan Grayson. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
You are listening to the Florida Roundtable, and if you'll stay put, we will continue the conversation with the Congressman following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And our very special guest this day in studio is Orlando area Democratic Congressman Alan Grayson. Alan, always a pleasure to have you with us in the studio. And boy, so much. I'm thinking what we ought to do is just notify the stations right now that we're going to take over for the next 4 hours so we can get in everything we want to talk to you about.
That might cover it.
It might, yeah, we'd get a little bit closer anyways. But my goodness, so much going on. And Al, I'll let you take the next question.
So last month, of course, we had Boehner take control, obviously, of the House. There was a little bit of defection there. A little surprising seeing that he had to try to kind of work some angles to even hold on to his job. There's a little bit of what is it, in the ranks? Or we had a few guys try to take his job, including the guy who ran against you, Dan Webster, and that was quite interesting. Of course, Dan lost his position on, I forgot which committee it was.
The Rules Committee position, which was a position where he could have done a lot of good for his constituents, and he blew it.
What do you think? What got into his head? What do you think? What do you think got into any of their heads to do this?
I think Dan looks in the mirror and says each morning, "Why am I not Speaker of the House? I'm such a wonderful guy." But it was hubris on his part. It was silly and it was nonsensical. But the fact is that Boehner does have weaknesses, and the biggest weakness is that he doesn't really know what to do. He doesn't know where to go. He basically wants to consolidate and preserve his power, and that in itself makes him powerless. He's not a leader. When Pelosi was in charge, nobody ever said, "Gee, I wish Nancy Pelosi would do more." I never heard anybody say that.
Even in the minority positions, they're not saying that.
That's right. I mean,
so.
She's a dynamo, but Boehner, basically just wants to get through the day and keep his job and have an occasional round of golf with the president, and leave it at that. And that's not what the country needs, and even conservatives recognize that. So he's very vulnerable. We have 435 members, so you'd think that it would take 218 votes to elect a speaker. He didn't get 218 votes. The only reason why he's speaker today is because of Mario Cuomo's funeral. Turns out that many of the Democratic members weren't able to attend that day, the day that we were choosing our leader, because they were attending Mario Cuomo's funeral in New York City. So if they had actually been present and they had voted, Boehner would not have gotten to his majority.
You think so?
I think
and
yes. Those are the numbers. You could look it up. Virtually everybody who was absent that day was a Democrat from New York.
So what would have happened then?
Well, then we have a second ballot, a third ballot, a fourth ballot. I'm pretty sure Daniel Webster wouldn't have been speaker, but you probably would have seen some effort to have a well-respected senior member of the Republican caucus, like, let's say, Lamar Smith from Texas.
So why is Boehner the anointed then?
Well, he's got the power, and he manipulates the situation to keep it. He rules through fear. Every one of the Republicans is always looking over his shoulder saying, am I going to be able to keep my position on my committee? Am I going to be able to remain chairman of this committee or chairman of that subcommittee? We have an interesting example of that here locally. John Mica, who I actually like and respect, John Mica was in line to become a chairman of a government oversight committee this time, and Boehner basically prevented it from happening so that he could keep everybody at bay by handing out more favors to the people who support him. So he gave that little gift to somebody else.
I'd like to shift a little bit, Congressman, here. All the issues that are confronting you on Capitol Hill, amongst the biggest, the foreign policy. We've got some critical situations around the world and hardly know which way they're going to turn on any given day. And I'd like to see if we can squeeze both of them in here with some of your positions and opinions.
Well, geez, we've got 6 minutes and 43 seconds, so it shouldn't be any problem. Well, maybe we can bring about Mideast peace while we're at it.
It's more than the 20 seconds you would get on Channel 6.
That is true. You're right about that.
How about let's start with this ISIS business. Tell us where you're at and where you see this going.
Well, my view is that there's actually no will to win. Clearly everybody understands that when Americans are beheaded, when Jordanians are burnt to death, the world needs to do something about this. Not necessarily the United States, but the world needs to do something about this. This is basically government through terrorism being instituted in a large swath of the Middle East. So there is the urge to do something. But what happens is that at the same time as that there's the urge, there are constraints. So to give you some examples, there's no consideration, for instance, of using any sort of massive weapons against ISIS to defeat it. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, even napalm or white phosphorus or depleted uranium weapons. So we've taken those weapons off the table. Then, of course, we're starting with the premise that we're not going to have any boots on the ground. We're not going to have any U.S. soldiers actually firing at ISIS members and ISIS fighters. We're not going to do that either. We're not going to have any torture. We've taken that off the table. We're not going to have any collective punishment where we hold family members of ISIS fighters responsible for what they do. We're not going to have any actual fighting done by anybody but our designated proxies. In Syria, they're non-existent. And in Iraq, it's the already defeated Iraqi army. And on like that. So all these won'ts lead to a situation where, because of the heavy constraints on our activity, we really have no winning strategy. And so essentially what we're doing is we're giving lip service to the idea of defeating ISIS without actually doing anything to make that happen. There is no conceivable way that you can defeat ISIS from the air. And even from the air, we're heavily constrained. For instance, we don't use drones, at least at this point. We don't use any low-flying aircraft that are vulnerable, so no helicopter gunships. All we do is bomb from 8-9 miles up in the air and keep our fingers crossed. And that's not going to win. So what we need a strategy that's actually a feasible strategy and not just lip service.
Right, and like you alluded to earlier, we've been supplying, obviously, all these Middle Eastern armies that are considered our allies, at least presently, with weapons for decades and armies and different things. So why is it not feasible that they take the brunt of these offenses, that they take on the responsibility of boots on the ground, and then we have an overseeing and like we're doing presently? To me, isn't that a version of a winning strategy as long as it's implemented correctly?
Well, that has turned into the worst won't of all, because we won't arm Iran. We won't help the Syrian government and Assad defeat ISIS. Actually, the most formidable ISIS opponents at this point, the Syrian government, except they seem to have worked it out with ISIS. They won't confront each other. We won't arm Hezbollah. We won't arm Al-Qaeda. We won't.
Yeah, right, but we have Saudi Arabia, we have Jordan, we have who else? We have Iraq. Well, it's not
Oman,
much left of Iraq,
Morocco,
but Morocco, right?
UAE.
We have all these, and we have their satellites. So
well, Al, you have stumbled into the Grayson plan.
Okay, there we go.
So,
right.
I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I asked John Kerry last year, our Secretary of State, whether he had even asked any Middle Eastern governments to provide ground troops, which is what's actually needed,
right,
to provide ground forces to fight ISIS, whether he even asked them. And he said no. Said I didn't ask them. So I asked him. I sent out letters to the ambassadors of 10 different Middle Eastern Arab countries, Muslim countries, asking them, would you provide ground forces? And I got some interesting answers. The answer from the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, was yes. Yes, we will. We'll do that. The answer from Egypt is yes, if it's authorized by the UN, which actually has happened since then. The United Nations actually has authorized ground forces to attack. So that conditional yes is now an unconditional
now
yes.
It's a yes. Right.
With what's happened in Jordan recently, where one of their pilots got burnt to death on video.
Now they're upset.
in.
So now they're in.
Right, and that may have been true even before that point, but it's definitely true now. So you've got 3 countries that are in, and then you've got a long line of countries that, with a little bit of negotiation and a little bit of cajoling, would be in. So if in that group, I put Oman, I put Morocco, I put possibly Saudi Arabia, I put Pakistan, and I put Turkey. And the beauty of that, not only because of the fact that it's not our blood that would be shed, leaving that important point aside, the beauty of that is that if you had these kinds of ground forces that were arrayed against ISIS, then the locals would not feel like it was a colonial force.
Right.
That was always our problem
Yes.
in Afghanistan. It was always our problem in Iraq. It's always our problem everywhere we go, that we don't speak the language, we don't look like them, we don't understand their customs.
And they think it's the Crusades all over again.
That's exactly right. And that's actually what has given the ISIS the opening to do this, because they claim that they are anti-crusaders. They are crusading against the occupation of the Middle East by the United States and its proxies in the form of these governments. So that would be the actual solution to the problem. That's what I'm arguing for right now. I hope we make some progress, because right now we don't have a winning strategy. Our strategy is farcical. In Syria, we're going to take optometrists and nurses, and we're going to pretend that they're fighters against ISIS.
You're listening to the Florida Roundtable. Unfortunately, we got to pause there, but we'll let you come back and tie up that thought here in a moment, sir. I'm Reagan Smith.
I think you should call it the Spry Grayson plan.
Oh, all right.
Our very special guest this day in studio is Democratic Orlando area Congressman Alan Grayson. And it is always a pleasure to have you with us, sir. We're delighted you had all this time to spend with us today, and we'll continue in a moment. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest in studio today is Congressman Alan Grayson of the Orlando area. And Congressman, again, I say thank you for being with us today.
Well, thanks, but I have to say, I got to get something off my chest. This is not a roundtable. I don't know.
I know it.
It's kind of bugging me that you call this the roundtable.
I think it looks like
a
blunted arrow, if you notice.
It does. It has that,
Yeah, well, life is a blunted arrow, right?
Well,
but I mean, very few of our audience can actually see what I'm talking about, but it's not even close.
Our Tough TV audience can see it, of course.
Yes, right.
We take radio as theater of the imagination, theater of the mind.
That's right.
You really don't know
for me, because everybody knows I got a face for radio.
And also, you guys don't really want to know what's going on in my imagination right now.
Right.
But,
well, listen, before the clock catches up with us here, and
All
it
right.
does, it runs too fast, I wanted to give you an opportunity to address this situation that's going on in Ukraine. What's up? We don't really know where it's going at this point.
Well, listen, I think it's important to recognize that although it makes for interesting theater, we don't necessarily have to get involved in every single thing that's going on around the world. Again, there is this impulse that some of our leaders have, who are stricken with hubris, to say we'll go ahead and dominate, control every situation. And Ukraine is actually a good example of that. There are many people who say we have to do this, we have to do that. Western civilization is at stake. It's not. It's not. We'll continue to be able to turn on our light switches regardless of who ends up controlling the Ukraine. But what's happened is that roughly 2 million people in Crimea and the surrounding areas feel like they're in the wrong country. That part of the Ukraine was a gift by Khrushchev to the Ukrainian, at the time, Ukrainian leader. He simply uprooted that peninsula from Russia and handed it over to the Ukrainian government, which at that point was part of the Soviet Union. And it remained that way when the Soviet Union broke up. The people in Crimea are almost entirely, well over 90% Russian-speaking. They have voted for the Russian party in national elections by overwhelming numbers in every election, including free elections that have happened since Ukraine declared independence in the early 90s. And they just didn't want to be there any longer. Now, interestingly enough, although we excoriated the Russians for supposedly dictating that result, the Russians managed to dislodge Crimea from the Ukraine with no deaths, something that is an interesting comparison to what happens when we unleash our military in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and in Syria, in Iraq, and so on. There were no deaths. And so the net result of that was that the people in the Crimea removed themselves from the Ukraine and through self-determination, in my opinion, decided to join Russia. They had a vote on it. The vote was absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah, but you don't see a slippery slope here. History always repeats itself. And,
I hope there is a slippery slope. Not in the sense of having Russia being enlarged. That's ridiculous. But what I hope is that there's a slippery slope towards self-determination.
Right,
there's many places around the country where people feel like they're imprisoned.
But you could say the same thing at the start of World War II when Germany annexed the German-speaking territories in Czechoslovakia, and we gave it to Germany saying, well, that's all they want, and then those people speak German anyway, and so let's just give it to Hitler. I'm not making a direct correlation, but don't you see that there is some similarities to
well,
that?
I think if Hitler had stopped in the Sudetenland and not invaded Poland, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway, not to mention the Soviet Union, then we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Well, where does Putin want to stop? That's the main question.
Well, there's no indication that Putin wants to take over the world the way that Hitler did.
No, I never said that. But do you think he wants a greater Russia or to redo somewhat what the Soviet Union was ultimately?
Well, he's had power now for many years, and the consistent pattern when he exercises power is that he wants to act as a protector of Russian speakers who are lodged in other countries, whether it's Moldova, whether it's Lithuania and Latvia. It's particularly Latvia, which is almost half Russian speaking, and whether it's the Ukraine. The breakup of the Soviet Union left populations outside of Russia that are Russian by self-identification, and he's acted as their protector, for better or for worse. We would do the same. In fact, Florida is an example of that. In Florida, we left Spain and joined the United States because of English-speaking settlers who managed to get the United States to invade and occupy Florida. That's how Florida became part of the United States. That's the same as what Putin thinks he's doing on his side of the world.
We're going to, I'll tell you what, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about this before we have to part company here. But your wish list in the days and months, the year ahead, and working as a minority member of Congress.
Get stuff done. You know, I'm really proud of the fact that we passed 15 bills in December, that we passed 31 amendments in the past 2 years on the floor of the House, that I accounted for half of all the amendments on one of my committees and 1/3 of all the amendments on another one of my committees, even though we have 40 members on each committee. We get stuff done. I want to be an action figure. I want to be, if you will, a superhero in terms of getting good stuff done for my constituents and people around the country.
You want a little 12-inch long, foot doll sold in Target, Super Grayson with a S on your chest, and
yes, as long as I get the royalties. Yes.
So what do you want people to take away from this interview? Well, 30 seconds. How should people rethink Alan Grayson?
I want people to understand that I do have principles. I stick to those principles. Those principles are manifest in what we get done, but boy, do we get stuff done. And I could give you countless examples both here locally and around the country. Look at the VA hospital that's opening up. Look at the fact that we got funding for the second part of Sunrail. I could go on and on. We kept Kissimmee Airport open thanks to the work of my office and me. So look, people want a representative who's actually going to get stuff done. I get stuff done.
And I must tell you, it is incredibly refreshing to hear a member of the minority party talk with such optimism as well. So, Alan Grayson, thank you so much for being with us today. Come back and do this again soon, please.
I'd love to. Thank you very much, both of you.
This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we'll be back with a closing thought following these messages. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And a pleasure to have Alan Grayson with us again. I hope he does come back in the next 90 days or so, and we'll get an update from him.
I like Alan, and I had Alan on for a reason, because, a lot of folks that listen to Florida Roundtable are conservative, and a lot of folks are moderate, and some folks are liberal.
Yep.
And so we don't want to just show that we're just hitting conservative all the time, which
That's
we have more of a tendency to do, although we are more libertarian than strictly conservative down the pipe.
Right.
So Alan Grayson has some libertarian views.
Yeah, which don't often get out there.
Yeah, because people want to pigeonhole him.
Sure.
So I like to give him an opportunity. So for all the liberal folks who think that we're just straight conservatives and like to say so, I say, yeah, yeah, yeah.
We hope you paid attention this past hour. Yes.
The Bush team is hiring, the digital hire for the Bush team, I should say, deleting unsavory tweets about women. Democrats are happily circulating deleted tweets from a new Bush staffer that refer to, quote, sluts, unquote, drinking and sex.
But that's American.
It sounds like my Saturday night. But Time reported the hire of Ethan Cesar, in addition to Bush's online team, Then, of course, Czahor, which is spelled Czahor, started deleting the past. The governor, the quote is, the Governor Bush believes the comments were inappropriate. They've been deleted at our request. Ethan's a great talent in the tech world. We're very excited to have him on board the Right to Rise PAC. And then a couple of these texts that were deleted. New study confirms own belief. College female art majors are sluts. Science majors are also sluts, but uglier. And when I burp in the gym, I feel like it's my way of saying, sorry, guys, but I'm not gay. And here's another one. I know Lindsay Lohan is supposed to die soon, but I'd sure like to sleep with her before that happens. So not exactly conservative-friendly chatter on his social networking. Got to be careful about that, especially when you're a new hire.
Unlike Rick Scott, though, however, Governor Bush has announced that he will release all of the emails from his years as governor. Interesting what we might find in there. Well, it is time for us to run up the white flag here, and we'll call this one a show. We do thank you for your time, and we hope that you will join us again 1 week hence on many of these same stations. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And again, contact us at the Florida Roundtable. Let us know your thoughts. We'll see you again with another edition in 1 week.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.